Well, welcome back to another episode of the Financially Free Journey podcast, where we aim to dispel the seemingly complex topic of personal finances, money management, debt, savings, and all things investing. And a key element that we should always remember to prioritize on our path to financial freedom is our mental health, which brings us to today's guest, Dr. John Delony. And Dr. John Delony is a national best-selling author, a mental health and wellness expert, and the host of the Dr. John Delony Show. He holds 2 PhDs, one in counselor education and supervision, and another in higher education administration. Now, before joining Ramsey Solutions, Dr. Delony spent 2 decades working as a crisis responder and professor, a researcher and senior leader at multiple universities, a professor and a researcher and a crisis responder. And now as a Ramsey personality, he teaches people how to reclaim their lives from the madness of the modern world. I'll make sure to link it below, but you can follow him on all socials. Well, welcome to the show today, Dr. John Delony. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing so good. Thank you. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing amazing. I survived the weekend and I'm ready to rumble. I've been looking
Did you make
forward
good choices?
You know, that's a matter of perception, but perception is reality, right? So, well, you know what? As soon as I got my advanced reader copy of your book, I could not put it down. I was just telling you before we started recording, I binged your book. And I don't think I've ever binged a book in the last decade. That's so sad to say, but like physically reading it, not listening to a book, because this is such an important topic that I think a lot of people put on the back burner, right? It's like, well, I'll start focusing on my mental health, tomorrow when I don't have such a busy to-do schedule. So this is going to be huge for the listeners.
Thank you so much. You're so kind. Most of my friends texted me and said, dude, I couldn't make it through the first 3 pages. So your book's lame. And so thank you so much.
Well, they need it more than me then, apparently.
No, my friends are awesome. They've been great. But thank you so much.
Well, okay. So your book is called Own Your Past, Change Your Future. And I want to start with the first chapter. In the first chapter, you lay out the path to being well. And specifically, there's 5 steps that are repeated over and over again. Can we talk a little bit about each step?
Absolutely. And before we do that, I think it's important to note, nothing makes me more crazy than scrolling Instagram or Pinterest or something like that. And I spend hours a day on Pinterest, by the way. I don't even know how to log into that, but on social media, and somebody lays out the 7 steps to better abs or the 9 steps. Like those kind of things generally make me bonkers because they're so reductive. And so think of these steps as less, the magic formula and more just a series of principles that we're going to keep in our back pockets that are going to get us through the rest of our lives. And hopefully if we do life right, we pass them along to our kids and to our coworkers and to our friends and community.
Absolutely. It's not a silver bullet, right? Where it's like,
right.
This is the get rich quick scheme, right?
There's no fix for life. Yeah. Life just is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about these steps. And remember, it's not the 7 steps to quick abs.
Oh, if somebody has those, I'd love them though.
Absolutely.
So the first one is you got to own your stories. And what I'm talking about with owning your stories is these stories we were born into, the ones that just said, this is what our family does. We don't buy those kind of things because we're this kind of family, or we don't go to those kind of movies, or God loves you, or God is waiting for you to screw up so we can torture you for eternity, right? What these stories that we didn't even know were stories. We just thought they were is's, like they were was's, right? And when you're a kid, you just know that you don't go around dad on Sundays because he's grumpy, or you don't get around mom when she hasn't had enough sleep and she hadn't had her coffee because she might stab you in the eye with a fork, right? These are just things that are is, and we don't even think about them. Depending on what culture we grow up in, right? It might be that you need to be as thin as possible, or you need to be as big as possible, right? So it's just the air we breathe. And then you have these stories that we were told, and these are explicit or implicit. These are the ones that dad looked at you and said, you're always whining and crying about everything. Nothing in this house is good enough for you, is it? And he walks off, right? Or the mom who's just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And there's this little girl and she's 6 and she just says, hey mom, look what I drew. And And mom's like, yeah, And that little baby girl's asking herself, why does mom love that box more than me? And of course, she can't articulate that, but that little child feels that gap and will spend the rest of her life trying to solve that. That little boy will spend the rest of his life trying to look and sound and smell and be tough to win dad's approval. And he's never going to get it, right? So these are these stories we are told. And some of them are positive and some of them are negative. And some of them are stuff that we did, right? Like I've got to own up. I did some stupid stuff when I was a kid. And ultimately the ones we're born into, the ones we were told, unfortunately, those become the stories we tell ourselves. I say unfortunately, sometimes it's fortunately too. But those become the stories we tell ourselves. So that little girl whose mom won't pry her eyes away from Instagram becomes the woman who, when they say, hey, can anybody here pick this extra shift? We're going to, I want someone who's going to be an assistant vice president here soon. Will somebody pick this up? And their first thought is, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm not good enough for that. Or the guy whose truck is all jacked up and huge and spends more time on protein shakes and being in the gym or whatever, and does not know how to have a relationship. Right. I'm trying to have all these external ways to prove to you how tough I am, that I don't whine. Right. And so we just chase these things forever. And then we wake up and we're 40 or we're 30 and our marriages they're fine. They're fine. You know, you're supposed to just gain weight and be annoying. And she's just going to do this and he's just going to do that and whatever. And our kids are fine and our lives are fine and our backs hurt and our knees hurt. Right. And so this just becomes what we call normal life. And then we pass it on to our kids and they pass it on to theirs and so on and so forth. Right. And this is nothing to do with child abuse or sexual abuse or that boyfriend who wouldn't honor your boundaries or right. So you throw in some major trauma in there along the way. Yeah, man, these stories guide everything.
Well, and our beliefs about ourselves and who we are. And a lot of it is subconscious, right? I mean, a lot of it is on autopilot and we don't even understand.
I love that word. Yeah. It's just autopilot. It's just, we're not a math family. Okay. Right. Like that's just who we don't read books in this house. We watch movies. People who read are stupid, right? Whatever the meta narrative is. And you just wake up one day and you're 40 and you've passed that along to your kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Something that you may not even like about yourself, but you haven't acknowledged it. And it just becomes a part of who you are in the narrative of your family. There was one quote from the first chapter here when it said, the story of one of us is the story of us all. My story is your story and your story is my story. And we're bound together. And I loved that because a lot of times the trauma that we feel or these stories that we are told or that we experience, we feel are so unique to us and no one else understands it or has felt this. They won't get me, right? If I talk about this. And so we just kind of keep it bottled up, right? Specifically with like your significant other. But a lot of times we have all experienced something so similar, right? We're unique, but we have a lot of similar experiences.
Yeah. And sometimes the experience might be the secrets that we're keeping. Yeah. The experience might be, I sense this gap in our relationship. We haven't slept together in 2 months and I don't have the tools to say, hey, what's going on? Or is it me? And so what I do is I drink a little bit more, or I get a little bit angrier, or I stay out a little bit later, or I spend more time at work, or whatever the thing is. And your partner may be doing their coping strategy. And suddenly you find yourself, I think I mentioned this in the book, you find yourself 2 inches apart and 2,000 miles away from each other, right? You're both sitting there on your own devices. You're sleeping in the same bed and you know what's going on in the heart and mind of that person right next to you. And I've experienced that multiple times. I've been married for a long time. Just seasons of profound loneliness, but I'm sharing a bed with somebody I know who loves me, right? But it's just these stories that loop and loop and loop and loop. And until you own those and say, this is what I was told, this is what I was born into, until you own those, your body, it's a body thing. Your body will spend forever trying to solve these stories.
Absolutely. No, I love that you said it's on a loop. You know, it's something we have to break out of this cycle. And I wanted to, for the listeners, if you could give some examples maybe of some common stories that we've believed, or, you know, if you could lay that out a little bit for us.
Yeah. Some of the most common ones I've heard over the years is, I'm too fat to be loved, or he doesn't think I'm beautiful because he doesn't have the tools in his toolkit to say those words out loud. He's never even seen those words uttered.
Right.
that she'll only love me if fill in the blank, muscles, money, job title, car, fill in the blank. And there's just a thing I can do. And then my dad's going to pick up the phone and call me and tell me he's proud of me. If I can figure out that right sentence to say. I was working with somebody the other day, just behind closed doors as a private conversation. And the person said, I'm just looking for that one sentence that will give me some clarity. And I looked at him and said, that sentence will never come. That sentence doesn't exist. And there was a kind of a peace and also a drop of shoulders kind of heaviness, right? So much around how do we look and what do our job titles tell about us? And now once you start having kids, the stories of our kids are our metric. If they make good grades, that's a reflection of how good of a parents we are. If they say yes, sir, and no, sir, if they are good on an athletic field or in dance competition, then somehow that reflects on, like, puts me higher in the hierarchy of who's doing parenting well, right? There's these things that go over and over and over again, but most of them go back to, I'm not enough. There's something about me that's flawed and that keeps me from being lovable or acceptable or able to do hard things.
Yeah, it's that external validation that we're looking for. But as you talked about in the beginning of the book, it's like if we're not willing to look at the cracks in our own foundation, and guys, when you read the book, you'll be able to dig more into that analogy because it's so pertinent to this conversation. But you're looking for that external validation. And it's like, as you said, well, that perfect sentence is never going to come. You have to realize that.
Yeah, and the finish line just moves, right? Yeah. The finish line just moves and it moves and it moves. And so you have to play a different game. You got to get on a different track that doesn't have a finish line to it. That's just endless, right?
Well, as you talked about with your own story in the book, it's like you have so many accolades and accomplishments and these amazing job titles that people would be like, what? I mean, whoa, Dr. John Delony, PhD squared. I mean, this is crazy,
And right when you were saying that in my head, I literally had to stop myself because I went blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? That's the loop in my head when I hear those things. Yeah.
Well, because again, it's like breaking that cycle of that meaning so much more to us. One thing I wanted to dig into, though, is in your book, you talked about most of these stories that we believe, or like those examples you just gave, are trauma related. And I know trauma is such like a big word that's thrown around on social media, right? Everybody's talking about like their trauma. But what are some misconceptions about trauma and how does it impact our lives?
I think the biggest misconception about trauma is, one, you're right. It's become a kind of a catch-all term, and I don't mind that at all. But it's become a symbol. It's become like a certificate, like a badge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I want to do away with that. It's more like hair. We all have it, right? It's all have it. And some of us have great hair and some of us have it in like not great hair and in places we don't, right? It's hair. Everybody's got it.
Absolutely.
The biggest misconception about trauma is that it's only acute. It's only these big, what I call Cinderblock moments. If you think of life, you're carrying a backpack. When you're 11 and the school counselor comes and gets you and walks you down the hall and brings you into her office and your mom is in there and the principal's in there and your mom's crying and your school counselor holds both your hands and says, your daddy has had a heart attack and he has died, right? Uh-huh. We think that is trauma, and it is. Of course it is. Child abuse, sexual abuse, divorce when you're, right? Those things are traumatic. They certainly are. Yeah. War, right? What our neighbors in Ukraine are going with, like bombs drop. That's all big T acute trauma.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a trauma researcher, and she studied secondary traumatic stress. And one day we were talking, and she gave me a word that forever shifted how I think about trauma and sent me on a new adventure, both in my research and just in how I interact with my community. She said trauma is cumulative, and it's small t as well. What does that mean? Going back to that mom who's just scrolling while that little girl is there. Think of that backpack. She's not throwing a cinder block in there. She's not hitting that little girl. She's not saying, I hate you. Get out of my face. I never wanted you. She's not doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
But she's just ignoring that little girl. And she is showing that little girl that whatever's shiny on that box is more important than you. And think of that as a rock, as a pebble getting thrown into that backpack. And that happens all day, every day. Dad works 95 hours a week. He gets home and he's like, hey, who left your stuff out on the floor? That's how he walks in the door. And doesn't hug anybody, doesn't know how to say I love you to his kids, just says, hey, you didn't suck today, or way to go, you got an A. Or I heard you ran fast last weekend. I'm sorry I missed your meet, right? Those are little rocks, little rocks, little rocks. And over time, the backpack weighs the same.
Yeah.
And so you can be 28 years old and you've never been sexually assaulted. You've never been, your parents are still married, right? But your backpack is heavy. And we tend to dismiss it. We tend to compare grief. We tend to compare well, at least this didn't happen. Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. We can dismiss it and say, yeah, but they've had it so much worse. And if we don't acknowledge reality, if we don't own our reality, our bodies get buried by it. And so then you end up with the rise in psychosomatic pain, like just pain issues, right? Our knees hurt, our backs hurt. And if you think about it, our body is carrying this weight over and over and over. And our fight or flight system is running and running and running. And it's designed to run in short bursts for a bear or a tiger attack. It is not designed to go for day after day, year after year. And over time, our body just says, I'm out. I'm done. And that's what burnout is, right? That's when your body says, we're out. We're done.
Yeah.
I can't carry this anymore. I'm not carrying this bag anymore. And then it just goes out. That's what addiction is. Addiction's covering up the fact that your knees hurt and your legs hurt. So I can take this, I can drink this, I can sleep with him, I can sleep with her. I can just pass this thing along, right? And it's just Band-Aids over Band-Aids over Band-Aids until finally your body just says, I'm out.
Oh my gosh. Trauma is cumulative. I love this. I was visualizing as you were talking about a Cinderblock versus a pebble, and it weighs the same over time. But what seems to be the sneaky part of that is you can't articulate the trauma as well when it's small pebbles over time, right? Versus a Cinderblock, I can articulate if I was sexually assaulted, if I had, something that is huge, right? That people acknowledge as trauma versus the small things over time. And then it's so much harder for us to acknowledge that and even pinpoint and say, why does my backpack feel so freaking heavy?
Yeah. And it makes us crazy.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we get into shape, and that's Brene Brown's The Master, but that we get into, it's my fault. I'm clearly doing something wrong. And so we chase down the next self-help, the next keto diet, vegan diet, we're constantly we buy the next thing that we can't afford and the thing after that and the thing after that. We constantly are chasing something because we don't realize we're carrying this thing around. And ultimately, here's what sucks. We're responsible for setting it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hard. That's real hard.
Well, and we're looking for the next 7 steps to quick abs, and
right.
It's not out there, guys. It's not. Yeah. It's not going to fix the problem. You described grief in the book as the gap between what you hoped would happen and then what actually happened. I love that description, and that there's levels of grief. What tips do you have on grieving? And also, if you could maybe go over what the levels of grief are, I think that's important for the listeners.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note we live in a culture that doesn't accept grief. Because when I grieve, it makes people around me uncomfortable. And since we're a culture of we're all responsible for everybody else and their feelings and whether they're uncomfortable or not, we've come to pathologize. We've come to make grieving bad. And if you back up even further, about 150, well, not 150, thousands of years, we've been trying to solve for comfort, right? We've been creating a little bit more comfortable saddle and a little bit better plow, right? And then over the last couple hundred years, man, I love leather seats in my car, and I love an air conditioner in my house, and I love whatever farmhouse sink thing that we have. Like, I love all that stuff. It's awesome. But in the course of the last 100 years, where technology has just taken off on us and we've begun to solve for comfort, we've also begin to pathologize, make evil, make wrong anything that's uncomfortable. Sadness, frustration, boredom, anger. We've said, hey, those are problems that we can solve. Here's a pill. Here's a special class. Here's a yoga thing, right? We come up with solutions for what are basic human needs, human feelings, and we've just duct taped them all silently. And man, if you just duct tape over a wound, it's going to get infected, right? So what grief is, like you said, it's just that gap between, man, I really hoped that we were going to be married for 50 years and my wife got breast cancer and passed away. Yeah. I thought that my dad was going to live forever. He was such a big presence, and he was loud, and he hugged, and he told me he loved me. and then he had a heart attack, right? That's what grief is. But grief is also, there's little grief. Like when your friend forgets your birthday, and it's not to the end of time. But it's like, I wasn't worth a text, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that's not a fair analogy, but it was there. Or in my house, like we jump in the car and I say, hey, let's go grab something to eat. And I'm all excited about, Taco Tuesday at the Mexican food place down the street. And my wife gets in and she goes, all right, let's do this. And by the way, we're not going to that nasty Mexican food restaurant. We're going to get burgers. And I instantly go, right? And if I'm not careful, I can roll back to my stories have never mattered because I suck, right? Or you're always whining and complaining and nothing's ever like, why can't just eat at my restaurant? If I'm not careful, I can go down those paths. And what happens is in my car, I sit a little bit, like 1 inch. I'm leaning the other way from her because I'm kind of frustrated. And I'll drive a little bit faster. I'll turn the radio up a little bit louder so we're not having any conversations. And if she says anything, I can be like, what? Why are you always on? What? But really, I know I'm frustrated. And so the most important thing.
Wait, did you have a hidden camera in my car? Because
that's all of us, man. It's all
right. We are bound together.
That's right. That's right. We have to acknowledge grief. The little ones that just go, I wanted to eat the Mexican food place, but burgers are fine. Right? If I don't, my body will start solving that. And it will usually end up in a negative place because it's got a bunch of solutions to these problems. And it doesn't have to be stated out loud. In fact, rarely is stated out loud. It's just like, man, my friend missed my birthday. That kind of sucks. And then at that moment, I get to choose. He's a jerk and he's an idiot and I'm a loser and he didn't even like me ever. Or, man, he must have a ton going on in his life. I'm going to holler at him pretty soon. Right? I get to pick which one of those stories. I get to pick which one I double down on. Most of us double down on the one that hurts the worst, right? But when you have grief, you got to find a witness. You have to say these things out loud, especially the bigger ones. The little ones you can move on with, but the bigger ones, I had to go tell my wife, my birthday's in January. Dude, a couple of my buddies forgot a couple of my family members forgot my birthday. I had to say it out loud. And she said, that really sucks, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. It just, I'm going to say it out loud. But when somebody passes away, when you didn't get that job, when you got let go from your job, when you thought, I've been trying to pay off my debt so hard, and all of a sudden the air conditioner blows out and it's 10 grand I didn't have accounted for. Ugh. When you're going through those things, right? Grief, as the great David Kessler says, grief demands a witness. You got to say it in front of other people. When you lose a child, when you are bringing up these old historical traumas, you got to say it out loud. And then you got to get clear about them, man. You got to write these things down. They become a part of your physiology. The old saying in the mental health world is your childhood biography becomes your adult biology.
Oh,
and
wow.
so your body will continue to dump stress hormones every time you see a guy that kind of looks like that one guy. Every time your husband comes in the house, you treat him like he was your dad and you get real quiet and you don't want to say anything about the thing in his genes. It just creates these stories over and over, and your body your heart rate beats a little faster, dumps a little bit more cortisol and adrenaline. So these are all physiological things, but you got to get clear. Most of us say, I hate my job, or my husband, he sucked yesterday. Did he? Or was there two things he did that were annoying? He left his shoes out again and he didn't notice your haircut.
It's a big deal, right? John. Okay.
I know.
Don't leave the shoes out.
It's getting clear about them. And then you got to honor your body. This is one thing that the Nagotsky sisters brought to the conversation that I just love. They wrote a great book. Your readers, you can link to it. It's called Burnout. And here I am on your show selling somebody else's book, but it's so good. But when your fight or flight thing kicks off with the cortisol and adrenaline, all this stuff, our body's designed to pick up a rock and fight something, to sprint. And in our modern world, we don't do that. The chemical surge, and all of a sudden we like pick up our phones and thumbs down the crap out of that post, right? Or we send like a mean text. And our body, those chemicals are still stuck in our bodies. And so there's something powerful about exercise and walking and moving that allows those things just to cycle through like they have for centuries until we all of a sudden just took movement out of our lives overnight, right? So those are a couple things about grief. It's just important to say it out loud, and it's important to write it down. It's important, even little bitty grief, to not skip over it.
Well, and when you spoke about choosing the story in that moment, that seems to be, I think, a big change for a lot of people. We say logically that we want to do that, but in the moment, as we talked about earlier, a lot of this is on autopilot. So it's so hard to in the moment say, okay, I'm going to choose a different story. But that seems to be one of the biggest changes in this process.
Yeah, you got to own your thoughts, man. And I didn't know until just several years ago that I could change my thoughts. I thought I was stuck with the thoughts I got. And there's just been a lightning round of neuroscience that's come out. And if you go back to the ancient mystics who were meditating in caves, like they knew this too, right? That with practice and with intentionality and getting off autopilot and stop outsourcing your life, you can take control of your thoughts, which means I can control the stories, which mean when I remember that my dad abused me as a kid, I can feel that in my body and I can say that was then and I'm safe now.
Yeah.
And I can exhale and then my body doesn't take off on me. It doesn't start pumping blood through my head. It doesn't make me anxious. It doesn't immediately send me down a depression spiral. I own it and I can get sad about it. And then I can choose to think of something more positive in my life at this moment. And over time, if you practice this and practice it, the easy one for me is getting cut off in the highway, right? Somebody cuts me off in their stupid little square Kia and it drives me crazy. And I think like, that guy is trying to kill everybody. He's probably on drugs, that idiot. He's probably one of those guys, right? I can head on down the road. Or how many of us sit in the shower and have imaginary conversations with people that we will never have?
Absolutely. I win every fight in the shower. Every
one of them we win. And we will never have these in real life. Ever. How many people like replayed like, man, if Chris Rock had said that about my wife, you know what I would have done? You would have done nothing. None of those things would have happened. And they're never going to happen. And so these imaginary conversations ruminating over and over, a complete and utter waste of our time. And it feels like good thinking. It feels like positive thinking, like we're solving something. We're not. We're just spinning our body up, getting the chemicals running, and then we got nowhere for them to go. And they just eat us from the inside out. But going back to the driving exercise, I can go down that story about what an idiot this guy is. And of course he can't drive. Or I can say, God, I hope his wife's okay. Yeah. May you get to the hospital in peace and may you get there quickly and may she still be there when you get there. I can pick whichever one of those stories I'm following. One of them is going to send me to the grave earlier. One of them is going to make me infinitely more compassionate and empathetic. And I can extrapolate this to my government leaders. I can choose, you COVID morons, y'all should have, on either side of the argument.
Right.
Or I can say, you are tasked with keeping 340 million people alive. And there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of competing information. I hate that this is the situation y'all found yourselves in. Glad it wasn't me. I can pick either one of those, and one of those makes me nuts. And one of those gives me a little bit more peace, lets me sleep at night.
You know what? It's such a good point that you've made a couple of times now too, is that our body physically reacts to our thoughts. And I think that's so important to really drive home that we can own our thoughts. We can control our thoughts because our body truly does react. And, you know, you hear stories about people working themselves to death, right? They had a heart attack or they had a stroke because they were working 100 hours a week. It truly is a reaction. It's not an exaggeration. I mean, that's true, right?
Absolutely. So the hyper stress, the toxic stress, the word toxic kind of just lost its mind in our culture.
Right.
But yeah, our bodies aren't designed for that. You have to give it some rest. The other one that was the most concerning to me beneath toxic stress, and I think stress is an outgrowth of this. If you were to ask me what's the chief enemy of our time, in 2019, the study came out and I thought it was going to rattle the country. I thought it was going to be the study that got everybody going, whoa, 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 whoa. And of course, then COVID kicked off and nothing else mattered. But in 2019, the Journal of American Medical Association put out some info that for the third straight year, put out some data. The third straight year, the average life expectancy in the United States went down.
Wow.
Again, 3 years in the United States. We have too much money. We have too many caring people, too many caring entities, too many nonprofits. That's insane to me. And when they backed it up and dug into the data, they came up with something they call diseases of despair. It's like a trifecta of organ disease failures like heart disease and stroke and cancer and lung disease, right? Body's just shutting down. Suicide and addiction. opioid addiction, alcohol addiction. And what they said was, we are slowly over time, these are my words, lonelying ourselves to death.
Yes.
We are pathologically, insanely, for the first time in human history, utterly lonely. We're so lonely. Nobody knows us. We're full of secrets. We don't reach out to people. We've outsourced all of our relationships online, and our bodies are literally shutting down. So I think stress is a result. It's a fight or flight response that we're trying to solve and achieve relationship. If I just can do these things and do these things, either I don't have to deal with how lonely I am, or if I get enough money, then maybe they'll like me, or she'll like me, or he'll say I'm good, right? And we are profoundly lonely, and our bodies are paying the price for it.
Oh, well, that takes me to I wanted to make sure we touched on this because you've mentioned this too. Despite our social media, you got your Pinterest, your TikTok, your Instagram, we're connected with hundreds and hundreds of people at the touch of our fingertips. But despite all of this advanced technology and social media, we really are lonelier than ever. And you gave the example at the beginning of this episode where you could be laying next to your spouse, you're both scrolling on your phone, you're 5 inches apart, but you're lonely. You don't feel a real connection. And I think the pandemic has absolutely exacerbated this just across the world and across the board in general. Why, in your opinion, is connection important, and how can we meaningfully connect with others with this being such a widespread issue?
I mean, our bodies are designed for connection. We're co-regulated, meaning our body gets its signals for how to run from the other bodies in its area.
Yeah.
And if you back out a couple of thousand years and you're on the plains of Nebraska and your tribe, you wake up and your tribe has left you, you are probably going to die.
Yeah.
Whether you got eaten by something or the elements or exposure or ran out of food, you are going to die. And so our bodies have innate alarm systems when we're disconnected. One of the chief people say, I got anxiety. The diagnostic anxiety. One of the chief things is human connection. That's the alarm that's ringing when you find yourself disconnected from other people. That's why therapy is so great. There is some skills you learn in therapy, and you learn how head works, but therapy is human connection. Somebody is trained to listen to you and to be still and in your presence and to sit with you in your pain. That used to be done by friends. It used to be done by spiritual communities. It used to be done by neighbors, right? And now we've turned it into a job because we've outsourced everything, but that's a whole other podcast. But it's this, we have to recognize this. The data tells us, the science tells us that when your body recognizes it's lonely, it's as dangerous as smoking a number of cigarettes, okay? We all know that smoking will kill you. Regardless of what you think about it, or no way, bro, or whatever, loneliness equals a long, slow, miserable, painful death. Oh. And it drags down everybody around you. And so when I saw the data that way, I knew I have to be intentional about making friends. And I'm an introvert. I like to be at home by myself in the woods with my kids, or I like to be a nerd with my books. I read tons of books. I like going to bed. And I know if I do that, I'm going to die young. My kids are going to pay the price. My wife's going to pay the price. And I'm not going to be as good at my work. I'm not going to be as good at my job. Like all these downstream challenges here. So I have to force myself to get involved, to say yes, to invite people over, to be hospitable. And 100% of the time, I'm glad I did it. I never go do a thing and think, man, I should have just. It's always good to be around other people. It's always enlightening, and I can breathe better and I can breathe deeper. All those things are good. You got to go first. You got to extend hospitality. You have to say yes to craziness and adventures. You got to go to the concert, even though your bedtime's at 9. Go to the game. All those things. We got to share adventures. You got to go over to somebody's house and help them build the deck, even if you don't know how to do that, or go help make cupcakes. I don't know how to do that, but let's go try that.
You've got YouTube. You've got YouTube, guys. You can learn.
See, YouTube just pumped into our house, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have to ask our neighbor anymore.
Right.
Because our neighbor made a video for us halfway across the world. And we just watch that. We used to go to the movies, and now Netflix just says, hey, you'll like this. We'll just send it to you.
Yeah.
I used to go to concerts, and now, dude, I can get 4D concerts on the front. I can be on the stage with these little boom mics. I mean, the boom cameras flying around. I don't have to do anything anymore. And our bodies are are rattling at the edges, right? We are coming apart at the seams driving down the road because our bodies have to have other people to regulate us.
Gosh, I mean, again, I'm really am starting to think you have hidden cameras because I feel so attacked in the best way. Because again, I think we all feel this to some extent, the whole discussion that we've had today. And I'm going to make sure to link the resources that you've talked about, the book, your book, of course. And guys, I am so happy that I could have Dr. John Delony come on because this is so critical on our path to financial freedom, because this is a podcast that's designed to talk about money. But I think a lot of times we leave our mental health in the dust when it comes to focusing on trying to achieve financial freedom and build wealth. And we have to make sure that it really is one and the same, right? Because you have to have quality of life.
Well, and I co-host Dave Ramsey's show with him, and Dave, has been saying for 30 years, man, your financial position, where you sit financially, how much debt you have, how much wealth you is a direct representative of how well you are, how well your relationships are, how whole you are. And it could be that you got shot out of the cannon sideways, that you were born into a cycle of poverty. You were born into parents who stole from you and manipulated you. You were a part of a marginalized population that has always earned less on the dollar. Like, all those things are real and all those things are true. No question about it, full stop. And at the end of the day, I have to look in the mirror and say, what am I going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And that's so hard, and it's a struggle. And especially if you don't have any models or tools, it's hard. Yet I have to look in the mirror and say, what comes next for me? And so, yes, and hey, it's important. We talk about a lot of heavy stuff. The book is about hope, and the book is about hopefully ends with a ray of sunshine at the end of it, man. Like, here's what we can do, and here's what the stuff could look like on the back end of this. If I can rally around a group of people and begin to change my thoughts and my actions, what could my life look like? What could my kids and my grandkids who don't even know yet, what could their lives look like, right? If we do the hard stuff now. So thank you so much for this conversation.
If you could have one parting thought, let's just say everybody had instant amnesia, they forgot our entire conversation for the last half hour, what's the one thing you want everybody to remember from this?
That you're worth being loved.
Gotcha.
And that your life as it is doesn't have to be this way.
Guys, remember that. You're worth being loved, and your current life does not have to be this way. You're in charge of your thoughts and your actions. And this book, I can attest that it is a ray of sunshine at the end. I binged it. I couldn't put it down. Normally I'll listen to audiobooks because my ADHD brain has to be multitasking at all times. So, that's how I'll do it. But this is the first time I've read a physical book in a long time, and it was worth it 100%. So thank you so much, Dr. Delony, for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And I'm excited for the listeners to read your book.
Courtney, you're so kind. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you. And thanks for putting out positive information, help people get their finances back in order. I am a direct beneficiary of these kind of messages. And man, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And you know where to find us. I'll make sure to link all of Dr. Delony's socials and ours as well. But thanks for tuning in today. And until next time.